Cemetery Tours. Written by Jacqueline E. Smith. Read by Pearce Chadwick. Chapter 1. It was a lazy Saturday morning, and as usual, Michael Sinclair was trying to decide how to spend it. Throughout the long work week, he would compose a mental list of things he would rather be doing. Reading one of the several books he'd accumulated over the years, taking advantage of his apartment complex's great swimming pool, or even making another pathetic attempt at learning to ride a bicycle. But by the time the weekend actually rolled around, he was so worn out, all he wanted to do was sleep in and spend the rest of the day lounging around in his pajamas, eating cereal, and catching up on Doctor Who. Today was no exception. He was rummaging through his near-empty pantry, kicking himself for forgetting to go to the grocery store yet again, when a movement out of the corner of his eye distracted him. "New neighbor alert!" Brink, Michael's friend and occasional roommate, announced and heaved himself onto the couch, propping his legs up on the coffee table. "Next door?" Michael asked. Mrs. Riggs, his mean old property manager, had been trying to rent out the apartment next to his for ages. It was no secret around the Riverview apartment complex that Building 17 was some kind of cursed. All tenants of the two-story building at one time or another had complained of strange noises, power failures, unexplained cold spells, and an overall feeling of unease and ill will. Only Michael Sinclair of apartment 1723 seemed immune. It was for that very reason that Mrs. Riggs figured he must somehow be the source of her other tenants' discomfort. Fortunately, she didn't have any sort of evidence to support her claims. Otherwise, she would have had him evicted right from the start. "Yep, young couple. Bat lady probably gave them a discount or something." Although the entire building suffered from technical difficulties, Mrs. Riggs had a much harder time keeping the second floor inhabited than its lower-level counterparts, especially the apartment next door to 1723. "Wonder how long they'll last?" Before Michael could offer an estimate, a muffled thud accompanied by a yell and the sound of shattering ceramic dishware resonated through the hallway just outside his front door. Cereal forgotten, Michael hurried to the door and pulled it open to see a young man sprawled across the landing. Next to him, broken plates and metal dining utensils spilled out of an old, flimsy cardboard box, held together by a substantial amount of duct tape. "Damn it," he muttered to himself as he scrambled to collect the shards of plates that had scattered across the landing. "Are you okay?" Michael asked. "Fine, just tripped," the young man replied gruffly. "Here, let me help." Michael dropped down next to his new neighbor and began to gather pieces of broken plates and silverware that had gone astray. "Gavin?" a new voice called. Michael turned to see a young woman with dark blonde hair sprinting up the stairs. "What happened? Are you all right?" She knelt down in front of Gavin and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm fine, Kate. Can't say the same for our dishes, though." Gavin rose up on his knees and dropped a handful of shattered plate into the box. "Oh well, they were secondhand anyway." For the first time, she acknowledged Michael. "Hi, I'm Kate. This is my brother, Gavin." "I'm Michael. I'm, your new neighbor." "I'm also," he realized, looking into her pretty hazel eyes, "still in my pajamas." "You look really familiar to me. Have we met before?" I don't know," Michael replied, though he was sure they hadn't. Most of the women Michael knew he met through his job at the local library. Besides, he would have remembered a girl as pretty as Kate. "Maybe we passed each other when you came to check out the apartment." "Maybe," Kate said, gathering up the box of broken dishes. "Kate, let me." Gavin took the box from her. As soon as he stood up, Michael noticed his bloodied, scuffed-up knee through his torn jeans. Kate saw it too and gasped. "Gavin, you need to get a Band-Aid on that." "It's fine, just a scrape. Besides, all our first aid stuff is buried in one of the boxes." "I have some Neosporin if you need it," Michael offered. Gavin answered, "No, it's all right," as Kate asked simultaneously, "Do you mind?" "Not at all." Michael quickly retreated back to his apartment, where he immediately shed his plaid pajama bottoms and white undershirt and replaced them with a pair of jeans and a polo shirt. Then he grabbed the yellow tube of Neosporin and a handful of Band-Aids from his bathroom drawer. Less than a minute later, he headed back across the landing where Kate and Gavin had left their door open. He knocked once before poking his head in. Kate and Gavin sat on the floor in the middle of the near-empty living room, sorting out the silverware and plates that were still intact. A few boxes sat on the sidelines. They were obviously still in the early stages of the moving process. Kate looked up at him. "Thank you so much," she said as she stood to greet him. He handed her the Band-Aids and Neosporin. "Can I get you something to drink? We have water." "I'm all right, but thanks," Michael answered. "I'll go to the store once we get my truck cleared out," Gavin announced, taking the medical supplies from his sister. "I need some more of those little energy drinks." "You've got to stop weaning yourself off that stuff. It's not good for you," Kate said. "Do you have a sister, Michael?" Gavin asked. "No? You want one?" "I'm serious." Kate crossed her arms. "You throw those back like an alcoholic at an open bar. Gav, that stuff is going to kill you." "Kate, you're paranoid and exaggerating," Gavin told her, applying Neosporin to his injured knee. Although Michael agreed that Kate was being a little extreme, she may have been onto something. Gavin didn't look very healthy at all. Although he couldn't have been more than a year or two younger than Michael's 27, his light hazel eyes were sunken and surrounded by dark shadows. His messy hair and 5 o'clock shadow were the same dark blonde color as Kate's, but his complexion was much paler, even a little gray in comparison to her rosy glow. He almost looked like someone going through some sort of withdrawal. "No, I'm not. Your addiction to that stuff is probably the reason you're so tired all the time. It's like being hooked on over-the-counter pain medicine. Eventually it's going to make the problem worse." Says the girl who can't function without 3 cups of coffee every morning. "Caffeine addiction is no joke, Kate," Gavin patronized. "Fine, drink your little energy drug, but don't come crying to me when you need a new kidney." "Kate, do you work in medicine?" Michael asked. "She's an interior decorator," Gavin remarked. "An overprotective, germophobic control freak of an interior decorator." "I'm not a control freak. I just think you need to take better care of yourself." "I do take care of myself, but we've been moving since 6 a.m. If I don't get some sort of energy boost, I'll be unconscious by noon." "Well, it's 11:10 now. Guess we better get a move on." "Do you have anyone helping you?" Michael asked. "No, our father's out of town and our mother has a bad back. We had a few friends come over last night and they helped us haul some of the heavier stuff down to the trailer we rented, but they all had plans today," Kate explained. "Do you need an extra hand?" This time it was Kate who said, "Oh, Michael, we couldn't ask that of you," while Gavin replied, "We'll pay you." "You don't have to pay me. I don't have anything to do today. If I wasn't here, I'd be wasting the day in front of the television." "Well, we can at least buy you lunch," Kate said. "Is Subway okay?" Michael wasn't sure what it was about her, but he had a feeling he would have agreed to anything she offered him. "Subway's great," he told her. An hour later, they just about cleared out Gavin's truck, and all 3 were starving. Kate and Michael assured Gavin they could handle the last few boxes while he got ready to run to Subway and the supermarket. Michael was making his way back down to the truck when he noticed something. A stack of laminated flashcards, hooked together on a single silver ring, lay in the middle of the sidewalk. Michael stooped down and picked them up. The word "red" was scrawled in red marker across the top card. Below that card, the word "orange" in orange marker, and "yellow" in yellow marker, and so on. Michael was so busy wondering what they were for, he barely noticed Kate approaching him. "What's that?" she asked. "Nothing. I think a neighbor kid must have dropped them." Michael showed them to her. "Actually, those are mine," Kate admitted, taking the cards from him and stuffing them in her pocket. She must have seen the curious look in Michael's eye because she explained. "About a week after New Year's Eve, I was in a car accident. I hit my head pretty good, and when I woke up, I couldn't remember the names of any of the colors. I still recognize them. I know that the color of a fire truck is the first color in the rainbow. I just can't for the life of me remember the names. The doctors call it color anomia. Ironically, I have no trouble remembering that." "I've never even heard of that," Michael told her. "Brain injuries are funny things," Kate replied, climbing into the back of Gavin's pickup truck and handing Michael another box. "Anyway, that's the reason Gavin and I moved in together. Our parents didn't want me living alone after my head trauma, and since I really didn't want to move back in with them, Gav offered to be my roommate. Kate grabbed the last box and duffel bag and jumped down next to Michael. Once they reached the apartment, Kate dropped the box and duffel and collapsed onto the floor, right in front of the giant box fan that Gavin had set up amidst the plastic bags and cardboard boxes heaped all around the living room. "You know what's going to be a lot of fun?" she asked, closing her eyes and savoring the blast of cool air emanating from the fan. "Dragging that couch up here." "I'm trying not to think about that," Gavin muttered from the kitchen counter as he scribbled down a list of things to get at the grocery store. "Kate, what do you want to drink?" "Gatorade. I need electrolytes." "What kind?" "This one." Kate held up her blue flashcard. "Got it." Gavin jotted it down. "Michael, do you want some Gatorade?" "I'll take some red, thanks," he said. Once Gavin was gone, Michael took a seat on the floor next to Kate. She had the right idea settling down in front of the fan. Even with the air on high, the apartment still felt stuffy in the mid-June Dallas heat. "So, Michael, tell me about yourself," Kate said, gazing up at him from her spot on the floor. Not sure what there is to tell," Michael replied honestly. He really wasn't a very interesting person. "Where do you work? How long have you lived here?" "I work inventory and shelve books at the library." "Exciting, I know," he said. Kate grinned. "I've lived here for 5 years, ever since I graduated from college." "Where did you go to school?" "UNT. I majored in interdisciplinary studies and minored in psychology." "That's pretty cool," Kate told him. "Sort of," Michael shrugged. "What about you? I know Gavin said you were an interior decorator." "Yep. I graduated from SMU 2 years ago with a degree in art and design. Got my job as a decorator about a month later, and that's what I've been doing ever since." "Do you enjoy it?" "Yeah, I do." "I hope you don't mind me asking, but is it difficult? You know, with the color thing?" Kate stared at the ceiling as she contemplated her answer. "It was pretty annoying at first, but my boss has been so wonderful about the whole situation. If she ever needs something in a specific color, she describes it to me. Like, instead of asking for a..." She flipped through her note cards until she found the one labeled green. "Green vase. She asks for a grass-colored vase. It's not a perfect system, but, you know, anytime I start to get frustrated, I remind myself how lucky I am just to be here, and that it could have been a lot worse." "I'm glad you're okay," Michael told her. She glanced over at him and smiled. He hoped she didn't notice the blush creeping up his neck as he cleared his throat and asked, "So, what about Gavin? What does he do?" "He's actually between jobs right now. He used to work as a sound technician for one of the local theaters, but about 2 months after my accident, he started getting sick a lot. He never had a fever or anything, but he'd feel drained and exhausted. His head would hurt, he'd get the chills. I really thought he had mono. But for some reason, he just refused to go to the doctor. It wasn't until he got so dizzy that he fell over that he finally made an appointment." "What was wrong with him?" Michael asked. "Absolutely nothing," Kate replied. "They ran all sorts of tests. Blood tests, MRIs, even a lumbar puncture. He was perfectly healthy. No mono, no anemia, absolutely no physical explanation for any of his symptoms." "So what did they do for him?" "Since there was technically nothing wrong with him, they really couldn't prescribe him anything. They advised him to take it easy and get plenty of rest. Unfortunately, about a week later, someone broke into our apartment. Neither of us slept well after that." "Are you serious?" Michael asked. "Yeah. Suffice to say, it has not been a fantastic year for the Avery family. Luckily for us, they didn't take anything. Or if they did, it was something we didn't use very often because we haven't noticed it missing." "Why bother breaking in then?" Michael asked. "Whoever it was, it looked like they were on some sort of rampage. The entire place was trashed. Furniture was moved, tables were knocked over, mirrors and picture frames were shattered. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. Coming home and finding the apartment like that, I was convinced whoever had done it was still inside." "Did you call the police?" "Yeah, but they didn't find anything that could help them," Kate explained. "I just hope that whoever it was didn't target us specifically. I hope they just picked a random apartment, and when they couldn't find anything of real value to steal, they decided to trash it. Gavin thinks I watch too many crime dramas, but I just have this horrible feeling that it was personal." Michael wasn't sure what to say. He was certainly no stranger to mysterious circumstances, but he'd never felt like he was being targeted. "That's one of several reasons I'm glad to be living in a gated community now." Kate looked at him. "I can't believe I told you all of that. I just met you. I should be telling you about the book I'm reading, or asking you what kind of movies you like, not dumping all my personal crisis on you." "I really don't mind," Michael told her. "But if you really want to know, I enjoy historical fiction and psychological thrillers." "Oh, have you seen—" By the time Gavin returned with food and drinks, their conversation about movies had evolved into a debate over whether the Hollywood adaptation of Shutter Island did the novel justice. Gavin also brought with him about 5 bottles of Super B energy. Kate frowned as she watched her brother down one in a single gulp. As they ate, Michael thought back to everything Kate told him about the break-in and how scared she was that whoever it had been was still out there. Although they'd never had a break-in at the Riverview apartments, he nevertheless felt he should warn her about the strange things that happened in Building 17. He was almost certain that if someone had told her about the curse, she'd never have signed the lease. Then again, he had no idea how he was going to tell her without seeming like he was trying to scare her. Besides, what if he told her and nothing happened? Then he would have scared her for nothing. No, it was probably better just to keep all that curse business quiet for now. Of course, if the last 6 months were any indication, Kate and Gavin Avery might have been under a curse of their own. Once they finished eating, they decided to tackle the trailer that was hooked up to the back of Kate's Land Rover. Inside the trailer, Kate and Gavin had stashed their bed frames, mattresses, a few small tables, and a couch. They decided to start with Kate's bed. It was the smallest and easiest to maneuver out of the packed trailer. They didn't have too much trouble getting the frame or the twin mattress up the stairs and into her room. Gavin's bed proved to be a little more of a challenge. It took all 3 of them to haul the full-size mattress up the stairs. Once they made it to the living room, Michael and Kate shoved it through the apartment while Gavin ran into his room to clear a pathway through his scattered belongings. "Oh, it feels good in here," Kate remarked, noting the sudden drop in temperature inside Gavin's room. "Gav, where do you want this?" "Just set it against the wall for now," Gavin answered. Michael barely heard him. His attention had fallen on the man standing in the corner of the room, clenching his fists and staring at Gavin with murderous eyes. Eyes that had long since looked their last. Chapter 2. He'd seen them for as long as he could remember. They'd never scared him, really. When he was younger, he hadn't known that there was anything different about them. By the time he was old enough to figure out that no one else could see them, he was also old enough to realize that being dead didn't turn people into monsters. It just meant that most of them were lonely. This guy scared him. He was tall, almost as tall as Michael, who towered above most people at 6'2", and muscular, something that Michael couldn't boast. His hair was dark and buzzed short like an army crew cut, and he wore dark navy jeans, a gray t-shirt, and an old black jacket. As intimidating as his physical appearance seemed, however, nothing compared to the fury and repulsion with which he stared at Gavin Avery. "Michael?" Kate's voice snapped Michael out of his stupor. "Are you all right?" "Yeah, fine." He wasn't fine, though. His voice had gone hoarse, the same way it always did whenever he tried to choke out a lie. He cleared his throat and assisted Kate and Gavin setting the mattress against the wall. No matter how he tried to convince himself otherwise, he could feel the stranger's eyes boring into the back of his neck. Although he didn't think the ghost had noticed him staring, he didn't want to draw any sort of attention to himself. This was the reason he never complained about the strange noises or feelings of discontent that plagued the other residents of Building 17. He'd always been a terrible liar, and anyone observing him too carefully would realize that when he said he had no explanation for the weird things that happened, he wasn't telling the truth. Once ghosts figured out that he could see them, they followed him home. Over the years, he'd gotten better at ignoring them, tuning them out, but there was always the occasional slip-up. He'd respond to an otherwise unheard voice, or accidentally make eye contact with someone who'd grown accustomed to being invisible. That was when the trouble started. Michael had learned the hard way that nothing good came from interfering in the affairs of the afterlife. He'd always been careful not to let anyone know what he could see, but everyone, from his classmates to his own mother, knew there was something off about him. Their suspicions were somewhat confirmed after he was arrested as a suspect in a murder investigation at the beginning of his senior year of high school. The charges were quickly dropped, but still, the damage had been done. Now, whenever spirits followed him home, he ignored them. This was frustrating for all parties involved, but especially for the ghosts. They knew he could see them, but when he didn't acknowledge them, they grew agitated. Some of them went crazy, throwing pots and pans around or heaving books off shelves in a desperate attempt to get his attention. They usually gave up and moved out after a week or so of being ignored. But some of them, the more annoying ones, tended to linger. Some acted out of spite, some out of boredom. Some flat out refused to move on for reasons that Michael could never figure out. Maybe they were waiting for someone, or maybe they were scared of crossing over. Michael could accept that. Still, he would have preferred they not make his apartment building their halfway house. Thinking back to everything Kate had told him about Gavin, his mysterious ailment, even the break-in, Michael knew he should have realized that those were the products of a haunting. He'd experienced the same symptoms of dizziness and exhaustion on multiple occasions. Spirits thrived on energy. It was how they moved heavy objects or manifested themselves to those who otherwise wouldn't be able to see them. They took this energy from any source they could find: electricity, radio waves, even the living. Especially the living. He had a theory that since his mind was already so open to the spirits, it made it easier for them to drain his energy. He wasn't sure if that was what was happening, or if all the physical exertion was finally catching up with him. But all of a sudden, he felt dizzy and lightheaded. He broke into a cold sweat, and without warning, the ground began to tilt. "I need to go," he announced abruptly. He concentrated all that remained of his energy on not falling over as he stumbled out of the room. "What's wrong?" Kate asked, eyeing him with obvious concern. "I'm sorry, Kate. He took a deep breath and willed himself to stay conscious. "I really don't feel well, and I need to go. I'm so sorry." He turned to leave, and in doing so, brought on such an intense wave of vertigo that he tripped over the leg of one of the bedside tables he'd helped to carry up. Everything blurred as he toppled to the ground. "Michael!" Kate shrieked. "Oh my God, are you okay?" "I'm fine. I'm sorry. I just need to go." He stood much faster than he should have. Tiny white stars exploded in front of his eyes, and he definitely twisted an ankle. But all he wanted was to get out of that apartment. "Well, thank you for all your help," Kate called as Michael half-hobbled, half-sprinted out onto the landing. As soon as he closed the door behind him, the dizziness began to subside. He leaned against the wall and took several deep breaths. That was close. No, that wasn't close. That wasn't even remotely close. Close would have been making it out of the apartment before a malevolent spirit drained him to the point of semi-consciousness. No, what had just happened had been a near bona fide disaster. Kate and Gavin must have thought he was a complete basket case. He was just lucky that his ankle had been the only casualty of his undignified departure. He didn't have to wonder why the ghost had drained him so quickly. He'd obviously been thriving off Gavin's waning energy for months. So why didn't he take Kate's energy? From what Michael could tell, she was as healthy and energetic as anyone he'd ever met. Even ghosts with a vengeance usually don't discriminate over whose energy they used. Maybe this one had a chivalrous streak. It wasn't unusual for ghosts to attach themselves to a specific person either, especially if they'd known that person in life, or if their unfinished business concerned that person. Whoever this guy was, he'd known Gavin. And judging by his hostility, it hadn't been a pleasant parting. Out of all the ghosts Michael had met in the last 27 years, only about a quarter of them were unaware of their passing. He had a few theories for this. Those who died of natural causes, such as disease or old age, usually had a fairly good idea that death was coming for them. That gave them time to prepare, to make peace with everything that might hold them to this realm or world or whatever, so that by the time they did die, they were able to pass from one life to the next without any sort of delay. The ones who stuck around were usually the ones whom death had claimed unexpectedly. Brink, for example. One moment he was skateboarding around his high school parking lot, the next he was gone. Unfortunately, the ones who'd lost their lives in traumatic experiences, like Brink and his skateboarding accident, were the ones who looked death square in the eye. They knew what had happened. They couldn't forget. They couldn't move on. So they stayed until something or someone could bring them peace. The remaining few seemed oblivious to their own demise. They were the ones that Michael pitied the most. Those who hadn't seen death coming at all. Perhaps death had come in the form of a heart attack, or maybe they'd gone to bed one night and simply left their body behind the next morning. Whatever the reason, they were left alone, confused and in denial. Michael often cursed himself for ignoring them, for being such a coward. But he wouldn't. He couldn't do anything that might make history repeat itself. With a heavy sigh, he walked back to his own apartment and flopped onto the couch. Brink appeared almost instantly. "Well, you were gone a long time," he remarked as he took a seat cross-legged on the coffee table. "Yeah," Michael replied shortly. 18-year-old Eugene Brinkley, otherwise known as Brink, was the only ghost besides his grandmother with whom Michael willingly communicated. They'd met while Michael was still in high school. Of course, Brink was already dead by then. It had been too depressing for him to hang around his house, and since he vowed to keep an eye on his younger siblings, both of whom attended the same high school, he spent most of his time there. After they graduated, he'd somewhat moved in with Michael. Brink died in the early 90s, and his appearance reflected it. His blonde hair fell in messy bangs across his forehead, and he wore baggy jeans and an unbuttoned plaid shirt that hung loosely to reveal a white undershirt. "So, what are they like?" Brink asked. "From what I can tell, cursed." Briefly, Michael told him all about Kate, Gavin, and their seemingly relentless streak of bad luck, including the ghostly visitor. "Wow," Brink said. "For the first time, you're not going to be responsible for all the crap that happens in this building." "That's what you got out of all this?" "What else is there?" "So they're haunted. Aren't a lot of people haunted?" "Not like this. This guy looked like he wanted to kill Gavin." "So what? Do you think Gavin murdered him?" Michael didn't want to go that far. Gavin didn't seem like the type to kill someone. Of course, that didn't necessarily mean he wasn't capable. In fact, Michael had learned in one of his psychology classes that psychopaths often taught themselves to mimic emotion and feign charisma in order to gain trust. But Michael had spent several hours with Gavin, and although he was sociable enough, he wasn't off the charts charismatic. "Whatever he did, I don't think it was good," Michael finally answered. "Maybe he did it in self-defense," Brink suggested. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you said this guy looked like bad news, right? What if he attacked Gavin first? Or Kate?" It made sense, although the more Michael thought about it, the more he realized it was only one of countless possible scenarios. The guy could have been a stalker, he could have been a former friend, maybe Gavin stole something from him, like a girlfriend. Maybe his death was accidental and Gavin had somehow been at fault. And where did Kate fit in? She seemed to care immensely about her brother. She obviously worried about his health. Did she have any idea he was connected to this dark spirit? Would she recognize the man if she saw a picture of him? Would the ghost eventually hurt her to get to Gavin? It was all too much to figure out in one sitting. "I don't know," Michael finally answered. "I guess anything's possible." Chapter 3. "So, how do you like your new apartment?" Valerie asked as she and Kate carried an intricate antique-style rug into the house they were helping to renovate. "I love it," Kate replied. It really was a great apartment. Along with being incredibly spacious, it included a fireplace, a washer and dryer, and a balcony that overlooked one of the nicest pools she'd ever seen in an apartment complex. "It's very light, very open, and I get to work out every time I run up or down the stairs." "Like you need to work out." At only 29, Valerie Banks was one of the most popular interior decorators in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. A bright, spunky black woman with a flair for both fashion and interior decorating. Valerie had the incredible gift of looking at a room once and knowing exactly what to do in order to make it beautiful, romantic, festive, or whatever her client had in mind. Of all the people who'd helped her after her accident, Val had been amongst the most supportive and understanding. "And how's Gavin liking it?" "You know him. He never tells me how he feels about anything, but I think he's pretty happy with it." Truthfully, Kate had no idea how Gavin felt about their new apartment. After they finally finished moving in, he went straight to bed and had slept most of Sunday. He'd awakened in time to help her finish setting everything up, but that wore him out as well. After a quick dinner, he crashed again and was still unconscious by the time she left for work that morning. This was ridiculous. There had to be something wrong with him. Maybe the doctors had screwed up his blood test or gotten his results mixed up with somebody else's. Maybe they should seek a second opinion. If Gavin didn't get better within the next couple of weeks, Kate was going to consult a specialist. "Have you met any of your neighbors?" Val asked as they situated the rug across the living room's fancy tigerwood floor. "Just one. He helped us move." "Ooh, how gallant. What's he like? Is he cute?" Kate laughed. Although she'd pretended not to notice, Michael was really cute. He was tall and a little lanky, but his shoulders were broad and strong, along with big dark eyes, dark wavy hair, and a great smile. He was definitely attractive. "Yeah, I guess so." "You guess so? Girl, you never guess about anything, especially cute guys." "Yes, he's cute," Kate grinned. "Really sweet, too." "So what are you waiting for? Go get him!" Unlike Gavin and her parents, who worried dating might be too stressful for her after everything that had happened, Valerie was always encouraging her to be more social. "We just met. Besides, the way my life's been going lately, he'll probably turn out to be a gremlin or something." "A gremlin?" "It was on ABC last night." "You watch way too much television," Val said, rising to her feet. "That's what Gavin always says," Kate remarked lightly. It was true, though. She was hooked on so many television shows, she couldn't keep up with them all. From Once Upon a Time to Criminal Minds to Big Bang Theory, she had a different show for every night of the week. Monday night was cemetery tours night, which meant Gavin would not be watching with her. He mocked her relentlessly for her addiction to the popular paranormal investigation series, which he called the biggest load of bullshit to ever disgrace primetime. But Kate found it fascinating. She'd always believed in ghosts, and a lot of evidence they capture on the show was enough to send chills down her spine. Not to mention, Luke Rayner, the lead investigator, was one of the most beautiful men ever pixelated on a television screen. But mostly, she watched it for the ghosts. "Well, I think you should give this guy a chance. When was the last time you had a real date?" Valerie had a point. Since her accident, Kate had only been on 2 dates, both of which were total disasters. The first guy, whom she'd met through mutual friends, loved to listen to himself talk so much that she barely got 2 words in. The second guy, Gavin's friend Alex, had thought it charming to spend a good portion of the night setting items in front of Kate and asking her what color they were. Fortunately, she'd managed to convince him that the tears of humiliation welling in her eyes were just allergies. Come to think of it, she hadn't had much luck with guys even before her accident. She'd only had one real boyfriend, Jeff, whom she dated for 9 months in college. Jeff was a sweet guy, but he was clingy. He made Kate feel more like a security blanket than a person. In the end, it was more than she could handle. None of the other guys she dated had been more than casual flings. If by real, you mean enjoyable, probably 7th grade when the cutest boy in my Spanish class took me out for a blizzard at Dairy Queen. You really are that pathetic, aren't you? Oh, yeah. Pulling into her driveway that evening, Kate noticed a familiar figure unloading groceries from his car. Thinking fast, she grabbed her lip gloss out of her purse and dabbed a little on her lips. Then she ran her fingers through her hair and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror before climbing out of her car. "Hey," she called casually over to Michael. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled. "Oh, hi. How are you?" "I'm great. How about you? Do you need some help?" "I think I've got it, but thanks," he replied, slamming his car door shut with his free hand. "No problem," she answered. It looked like he'd recovered from whatever was ailing him on Sunday. "Are you feeling better?" "Yeah, lots. I think I was just dehydrated." "Well, that'll do it." "Yeah, sorry I couldn't help you with the couch." "Don't worry about it. It was a lot easier than we thought it would be," Kate assured him. Their conversation had carried them up the stairs and to Michael's front door where they stopped. "Still, I wish I could have helped," he said. "You did help. You have no idea how much you helped." She could tell her praise embarrassed him, so she changed the subject. "Hey, listen, Gavin's birthday is this weekend, and we were going to have a few people over on Saturday evening to celebrate and to show off the new apartment. Would you like to come?" She could have sworn she saw a moment of hesitation flash in his eyes before he answered. "Yeah, that sounds like fun." "Great. We'll probably be spending most of our time down at the pool, so dress accordingly." Kate tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. It had been a while since she'd asked a guy out. Well, technically, she wasn't really asking him out. She was asking her new neighbor to come to a party. As a friend. A cute friend who looked really good in the jeans he was wearing, but still just a friend. "Party starts around 7, but I'm sure I'll see you before then. You know, because we're neighbors." "Okay, time to shut up and leave before you awkward him to death." "I'll be there," he smiled. "Great. Well, I guess I'll see you around then. And I'm really glad you're feeling better." "Thanks, Kate. I'll see you later." "Bye." And with a small wave, she walked across the landing and into her apartment. Michael spent the rest of the week trying to think of a reason not to attend Kate and Gavin's party. It shouldn't have been that hard, really. Neither Kate nor Gavin knew very much about him. He could easily tell them that his cousin was in town or that his mother had hoped to have dinner with him that evening. He could say that he had a friend who needed a favor. The more he thought about it, however, the feebler the excuses seemed. He could have always told them he was sick. Then again, he wasn't sure how credible that would be given his dehydration the prior weekend. He could just not show up, claiming that he'd forgotten or that he'd had a family emergency. Still, that seemed like a pretty weak cop-out. The real problem with all of those excuses, Michael realized, was that deep down he actually wanted to go to the party. It was the perfect opportunity to mingle, to see what else he could find out about the Avery siblings' strange and rather unfortunate past. Maybe one of their friends could tell him something that would clue him into the identity of their spectral stalker. He'd spent all Sunday browsing the internet trying to find anything he could on Gavin Avery. Aside from a few high school and college cross-country records, however, there wasn't much. Michael had also managed to track down both Kate and Gavin on Facebook. Kate added him as a friend later that evening. But even after scrolling through all of their photographs, he couldn't find a trace of the dark young man. He remembered Kate mentioning that Gavin had fallen ill around 2 months after her accident. That meant that whatever had happened occurred around late February, early March. Neither of their histories, however, revealed anything more than what Kate had already told him. Of all the questions Kate had left him with, she had been right about one thing. The break-in, the attack on their old apartment, had been personal, and it would likely happen again. Or maybe something worse. And although Michael was about 98% certain that the spirit's anger wasn't directed at Kate, he couldn't help but worry that she might still get caught in the crossfire between the ghost and his intended target. Truth be told, Michael could count on one hand the number of people he'd met or even heard of who'd been critically injured by a spirit, so there really was no reason to worry about Kate. Yet he did. He hadn't been in the room with the ghost for 2 minutes, and already he was turning out to be one of the most powerful spirits Michael had ever encountered. Only a handful could acquire and retain the amount of energy it took to trash an apartment, and he'd never met one that could drain energy so quickly and efficiently. Then, of course, there was the rage. The intense hatred that had resulted in the destruction of the living space, and that Michael had seen reflected all too clearly in the man's dark eyes. He'd met angry spirits before, but never of that caliber. As much as he tried to convince himself the only reason he wanted to go to the party was to find out more about the ghost, he realized that wasn't quite true. Although he'd been hoping to avoid Kate, he couldn't deny that part of him had been wanting to see her again. He knew that he would end up going to the party just because she'd invited him, and it was for that very reason he knew he should stay away. He dated a few girls in the past, and had even had one almost serious girlfriend, Natalie, but he'd ended up hurting all of them. Not because he was some smooth heartbreaker. That would have been less insulting, at least according to Natalie. As she'd put it, Michael didn't trust her enough to open up to her. It was obvious that he was keeping something from her, remaining distant and aloof instead of being honest with her. That was a lot more offensive than a guy who simply couldn't commit. He didn't want to hurt Kate the way he'd hurt Natalie. Unfortunately, if he wanted to spend more time with her, the only alternative to eventually hurting her was telling her the truth. He wasn't sure he'd ever be ready for that. Kate woke with a start. It was back. That horrible sense of unease, those hairs standing up on the back of her neck, the feeling that someone was standing right outside her bedroom door, listening, waiting. Kate had prayed that with her new apartment would come a sense of security. She hadn't slept soundly in her old apartment since the break-in. There had been several nights where she'd crept into Gavin's room and spent the night curled up in his old sleeping bag. It wasn't the most comfortable accommodation, but it was better than being alone. Now as she sat upright, dizzy and disoriented in the darkness of her new bedroom, she fought the urge to sprint across the hall into the sanctuary of her brother's room. She couldn't say for sure what had stirred her from her dreamless sleep, but she recognized the feeling almost immediately. Someone, or something, was in her apartment. Her therapist had told her that it was perfectly natural for victims of break-ins to experience insomnia, nightmares, even panic attacks. Kate knew she should trust her therapist, but she couldn't help but feel that her diagnosis wasn't entirely accurate. She had no trouble falling asleep, and she usually had pleasant dreams. Her problem was what woke her up in the middle of the night, the sensation that she was being watched. And now, it had followed her here. Gavin had told her that it was all in her head, and that if she kept reminding herself that, then the feeling would go away. Mind over matter, he'd always say. Kate was no stranger to the concept. Over the years, she'd mastered the art of willing away premenstrual nausea. She couldn't will this away. She tried as hard as she could to rationalize with herself. The apartment was locked. They were on the second floor. Gavin had been there all day. There was no one in her apartment. So why couldn't she shake the dreadful feeling that she wasn't alone? A quick glance at her cell phone told her that it was almost 2 a.m. She had to wake up at 6:30. Thank God it was Friday. With a sigh of resignation, she lay back down and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She had to at least try and get some rest. Desperate, she tried to think of something, anything, that could keep her mind off the unnerving presence. She thought of the movie she'd watched on Netflix earlier that day. She thought of the party she and Gavin would be hosting on Saturday. She thought of all the friends they'd invited and how they'd react to the new apartment. She thought of Michael. As she conjured up an image of his face, a surprising wave of serenity washed over her. Again, she felt a sense of familiarity as she pictured him. The day he'd helped them move, she felt so comfortable around him that she'd shared things that she hadn't even been able to share with some of her closest friends. What was it about him that made her trust him so completely? She barely even knew him. Whatever strange influence he held over her must have been powerful, because the next thing she knew, her alarm was ringing in her ear, and she was looking around her very empty sunlit room, wondering why she'd been so afraid a few short hours earlier.